Welcome back to Wellbeing Wednesdays, coming to you from the Tulane University Counseling Center. I'm one of your hosts, Shawna Foose. I'm a staff therapist at the center, and I'm joined as always by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jinaki Flint. I am staff psychologist here at the Counseling Center, and we are joined by Mr. Patrick Randolph, who is the director of the Goldman Center for Student Accessibility. Hello, Patrick. We are so excited to have you with us today. We are hoping that you will dispel some myths, give us some information, and we'll have a sprightly discussion about this one, I'm sure.
Well, I hope so. It's really a privilege and an honor to be with you guys today. I appreciate you reaching out, and yeah, just really excited to be a part of this. So thanks for having me.
Cool. It's great to have you here, Pat. Why don't we get started by talking about the Goldman Center and what you do there?
Yeah, sure. So the Goldman Center, for anybody that's not already familiar, is essentially Tulane University's version of disability services. The way we primarily support students is by making sure that any of our students with disabilities have the same access to all learning and living resources here on campus as their non-disabled peers. We do also have some kind of adjacent services for staff and faculty through our ADA and 504 accessibility coordinator, Catherine LaFrance. But the vast majority of the services that are offered through the Goldman Center are specifically geared towards student support. And yeah, I mean, it's a well-used service. It's people aren't shy about reaching out to us, and this is really the place where a lot of students that struggle with their learning for a variety of reasons are able to kind of bridge the gap, and it affords them the opportunity to perform at a level commensurate with their non-disabled peers and really just helps eliminate barriers. And that's kind of our overarching objective in all that we do.
Awesome. So Patrick, how would a student access the Goldman Center? What's the general process?
Well, we don't really have one set way, and the reason why is because we always try to take an individualized approach to student support, and the way that's most comfortable for one person to reach out to us might not look the same. So a student can walk in and 99 times out of 100, we'll have somebody available to meet with them right there in the moment. Worst case scenario, if they're not available for an in-person consultation, we can probably get them in within 24 hours. If somebody already has a storied or known history of receiving accommodations, either in post-secondary or in their K through 12 experience, they can really just go online. There is a request form that students can fill out online, and once they submit that request, kind of putting us on notice of what their needs are and what their request is, they would receive an email confirmation, and in that confirmation is a link that they can use to upload confidentially any supporting documentation that they have to support their request. But really, a prior history of accommodations isn't a requirement to get connected to the Goldman Center. Some students don't know that they have these needs until they reach Tulane or another post-secondary environment. So whether it's by phone, email to just goldman@tulane.edu, or visiting our website, which is just accessibility.tulane.edu. Lots of different ways. We will welcome and accept anyone, no matter how they get here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's an excellent point, that students may not even recognize that they have a need until they get here.
Absolutely, and sometimes I'm the one that convinces them to actually take the steps necessary to get that support. Sometimes there's stigma associated with it. Either just because of the phrase disability, right? Sometimes there's family stigma too, cultural stigma as well. Same thing that you guys experience in the counseling center, right? So there's a lot of reasons why people hesitate to connect with us. And what I would say is that none of those reasons should prevent a student from just coming in and having a candid conversation with us, and knowing that there are lots of options in how they can implement accommodation support. And again, it's an individualized approach. So it can be for one class, one semester. It could be non-academic. It could be because you have housing or dining needs. Again, just connect with us, have a conversation, and we can figure out the best way to support you, including if that simply means a referral to one of our campus partners like you guys.
Yeah, that's a great point too, that counseling and the Goldman Center have often interacted and worked together. And students don't always have to know which door they should be walking through, right? But having
just walk through a door and we'll get them through. Right.
Right, right. And so how would, for instance, we have a lot of, on college campuses, there's a lot of neurodiversity, right? And so when we talk about that in terms of having some type of uh, or mental space or emotional well-being or some type of emotional or mental uh, what what would be called illness. I don't like to really use that word, but when students struggle with that, how do accommodations happen for students with mental diagnoses?
That's a really great question, and I think I have to start by repeating a phrase that'll probably come up a lot today, which is it's a highly individualized approach, right? Everything we do is case by case, and there are certainly some accommodations that just organically fit into the puzzle of a specific diagnosis, right? But we don't make the assumption that just because we have one student with anxiety that their needs are going to replicate or closely match another student. So for some students that, any type of mental health disorder, and even in that same way, I don't like saying the word disorder. It's kind of customary. So we'll just be like learning differences or mental health differences.
Right. Yeah.
For some students, really, they just need support in the classroom, right? And for some, it's really limited and targeted towards testing situations. And taking a difference like anxiety, for example, even the way that manifests, like testing anxiety can mean two very different things to two different students. For some, it's the buildup, right? It's the anticipation to the test. It prevents them from adequately preparing and doing what they need to do to be ready for success in a testing situation. For others, it's actually in the moment, right? That anxiety spikes when they sit down, they look at their test, and their mind goes blank. So I think that probably the most transformative way that accommodations assist students with different mental health challenges or differences is by giving them the space and the time that they need to simply demonstrate their content knowledge, right? Allowing the student to have extended time for a test will never impact their testing performance in such a way where it inaccurately reflects their knowledge, right? And that's what professors should want, is for students to have the opportunity to demonstrate their content knowledge, even if that means a little bit of extra time, or maybe it means they need to take their test in a less distracting environment. So really just some very simple provisions like that in a testing space can really be transformative. I think the other way that it really supports students in terms of accommodations is housing, right? Particularly being a two-year residential college, right? Where we have students required to live on campus the first 2 years. I got news for you, not that this is a news flash, but living with other people is hard, even in a large space, right?
You tell it.
Exactly. I mean, people are difficult, myself included. We all have little nuances and preferences. And for some people, having certain housing provisions can really be impactful to their academic experience. For some students, it means that maybe the way that their mental health challenges manifest, it really requires private space, right? Again, not trying to associate an accommodation with a specific diagnosis, but thinking of students that maybe struggle with obsessive compulsive disorders, right? Ritualistic behaviors, needing things to be a certain way. Adding a roommate into an already confined space makes that extremely problematic. So those are just a couple of highlighted examples, I think, that speak to it. There are also supports that we can offer in the classroom to help students with capturing lecture content. But I think that probably when we think about mental health challenges, the way that they are most successfully impacted through the implementation of accommodations is both in the housing arena and then in testing situations, by and large.
Thank you for that. That clears up a whole lot.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, to know how that works, and it's very detailed too, because you guys see everything. There's this, there's developmental, there's this mental, and those two can sometimes be coexist.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that it's, hearing you speak about it, just feels like you guys have it covered.
We don't, right? I mean, I think it's good, and I want to be very candid.
Okay, so that's just me. I was impressed.
No, like maybe I'm in the wrong profession. Maybe I need to go into sales because you're clearly buying it. But we don't have it covered, right? Accessibility benefits all and it takes all, right? And so I think that that's a really important point, and I know Shawna is very familiar with this as well because of her prior work with the Goldman Center. But
Yes.
ability is so intersectional in terms of the way it impacts people's lives, and it's one of those few facets of diversity that really is impactful across all different dimensions, right? It's also the one form, well, not the one, but it's one of the very few forms of difference that can happen at any time, right? So like I don't necessarily need any supports now, but in a couple of years I might, right? And so I think that's true for every
Yeah, you
student.
just never know.
Yeah.
So I think that that only further highlights the importance of like it takes a village, right? It really, I can help promote accessibility, but until people are actually buying in and believing the positive and necessary impacts it has, we're
Yeah.
not going to go
Yeah.
anywhere.
Do you find that that sometimes acts as a barrier for students? This kind of ableism that happens and trying to draw everyone together to be a village for the student.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of misconceptions about accommodations that are negatively impactful in terms of creating a genuinely accessible and welcoming and inclusive environment for, something that really stands the test of time in terms of all diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. There's a lot of misconceptions about ADHD, for example, right? There's long history notions of people thinking that those students are lazy or they weren't parented properly. And those things might be real issues too, right? That might be a part of the student's profile. Maybe they are lazy, maybe they weren't parented well, but those things don't create attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I think that those types of misconceptions. I think the misconceptions, academically speaking, of people thinking that, well, if somebody gets extra time, that they're going to be able to perform better. Like, I'm pretty sure you could give me 8 days to complete a chemistry test and I'm going to fail it every single time, right? So time isn't a factor because it hasn't impacted my content knowledge. And I think that if most people can kind of wrap their head around that, they start to conceptualize what accommodations are actually there for. And it's really not so much, I think in the Goldman Center, and honestly, Shawna, during her time here, was really transformative in making this a priority for us. It's not so much about the diagnosis, right? It's what is the barrier? What is the barrier? And if the time is the barrier, particularly in testing situations, to me, that's a test design issue more than a student accommodation issue, right? So what can we do to improve this situation where it's not just positively impactful for the student, but for the entire class and likely the professor and the integrity of the exam as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, as Pat's mentioned, I had the great pleasure of working with him at the Goldman Center for 7 years. And it does my heart such good to be able to do this episode with you and talk about the ways we can conceptualize accessibility, and even if you think about it from like physical structural, everyone can walk in the door of a building that has a ramp or make their way into that building however they move. But not everyone can access that building on stairs. And, you don't know if you might break your leg and be on crutches and suddenly now you need the ramp too. So kind of being able to just drop all the worries about what the diagnosis is and really look at the access, I think helps to frame it. Think about design, structural design, academic design, teaching design.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be a more ableist informed pedagogy, especially in higher education.
Yeah.
I would say we do have, for anyone watching this episode that doesn't already know, the university has hired an inaugural chief diversity officer, Annalise Singh, who is wonderful. And I've had the fantastic and amazing opportunity to connect with Annalise a couple of times. And I'm really very hopeful that she will help move forward the accessibility initiative and really help it resonate with all the other DEI initiatives on campus. And I'm really feeling positive about that.
Yeah. And
yeah, I hope that happens. Yeah.
Me too. I think another piece of it that when we talk about ability as a facet of diversity is that very often conditions which impact our functioning aren't visible to the naked eye. And so like other facets of diversity, this is one that sometimes you can't really see. And so you don't always know a person's whole story. You don't always know what they're up against and what they're dealing with. And I think
that's hard, right? Because we, you know, even when I arrived here at Tulane in 2009, I felt like I had so much to learn specifically about, you know, non-physically manifesting disorders, right? Things that are more cognitive based or just processing based, right? And so even I had some hurdles to overcome, and my life's work has been in the field of disability services. So that is a challenge, and I think that's exceptionally difficult for faculty and staff and even upper administration, because we all have, I think, a very stereotypical view in our mind's eye of what disability looks like, right? And that's learned behavior, right? The same thing can be said of racism and any other type of infringement on human rights. It's not always intentional. Sometimes it's just learned behavior. But Shawna is 100% right. I mean, given the numbers of students we serve, the vast majority of those students have non-visible disabilities. So there is an element of trust that faculty and the Tulane community are putting into the Goldman Center when we're assessing student eligibilities. What I can say for anyone watching this episode today is we take that charge and that responsibility very seriously. And yes, our goal is always to, I'll say philosophically, you know, we always want students to be successful, right? Who wouldn't? If you're working in a university, that should be your ultimate goal. But my job under the law is not to create success, it's to create access. And it's breaking down barriers. And with that access comes an equal opportunity for failure, right? And so we're not here. I think that's important to say out loud, because if anybody's watching this and doesn't really know how accommodations work, for students that may be seeking accommodations, it's not a fix-all, it's not a cure-all, it's not because you get extended time, you're automatically going to start performing better. And for faculty and other people that might have misconceptions about, you know, the number of students that we're seeing registered through the Goldman Center, there's a lot that plays into why those numbers are increasing. And I can assure you, it's not because we're being less diligent or less thoughtful about eligibilities for those services. It is I wouldn't go so far as to say a rigorous process, because we make it very user-friendly, but there are standards that have to be met. And those standards are different than what students get in high school. And so there's a lot to it. And there's students that come to college that have never had accommodations before, that sometimes need support they never knew. There's also some students, not a lot, but a small handful, that come to us with a prior history of accommodations that then are not eligible at the post-secondary level. And again, I just feel it's important to highlight that, because this isn't the Oprah show, right? We're not just giving everybody whatever they want and say, like, you get a car, you get extended time, you get a distraction-induced environment. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's specific to the student's need. And being eligible, having a qualifying disability, does not mean you get whatever you want.
Yeah, this is important information to note. You know, we talk about dispelling myths. This is exactly what we're talking about. There are all these preconceived notions about exactly what happens when you try to access or give students accessibility. And so all of us need to hear that, you know, because we are part of that village, you know. Great.
Well, I know you guys deal with that stigma. I mean, you know, the misperception that somebody with mental health challenges is crazy, right? Like that's an absurd notion, right?
Right.
I'm happy to say here on record today on film, I have a therapist that I meet with regularly, and she helps me maintain my mental health and my overall well-being. And so just like certain people need our services, I know that probably more than are already connected to you guys could benefit from your services. It's really important that we prioritize mental health.
Yeah, and I like the way that we work together, because I find that oftentimes there's a lot of stress and anxiety that comes with the need for accommodations, right? And like you mentioned earlier, which I thought was an excellent point, there's a lot of stigma around that, a lot of what's wrong with me because I need this accommodation. And I think that having, working in tandem with the Counseling Center for students can be very helpful for kind of just creating, and one of the things that I know, even when Shawna worked with you, that she did very well was helping students to kind of get bypass some of that stigma and helping them process some of that stuff. And so when they, when they end up with us, they've heard it.
Yeah. Well, and again, it takes a village, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
that first time they hear it, it doesn't do it. Usually if they hear it from their parents, that definitely won't do it, right? So hearing it from a community of care is critical, and it takes all of us. Many hands make light work.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think, the idea of really empowering a student, I think we do that. I did it in the Goldman Center. We do it in the counseling center. Give them information, but really honor them as an independent person, which maybe this is the first time they've been able to make these decisions independently for themselves, right? In high school, the decisions are made by the school, and you take those accommodations. You don't have much control, and that really shifts at the post-secondary level. So making sure students really understand their rights and giving them that autonomy to be a part of their learning environment instead of kind of subject to it,
No, I think that's a really important point. And I think, back when you were even with us, we've always really prided ourselves on making sure that students get the support that they need while they're here at Tulane. But our vision is much further beyond that, right? So we try to remove the element of requiring another human to help those students, like maybe a peer note taker. Whenever possible, we want to incorporate non-human elements to support the students, assistive technology, essentially anything that can help that student be an autonomous learner and be self-sufficient is going to serve them well, not only during their time here at Tulane for a whole host of reasons, but it's going to posture them way better for success beyond their time at Tulane if they can learn to manage those things on their own without another human intervening. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but ultimately our goal is for overall success, not just Tulane success.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and that is what you can do, right? that is it, is to provide the autonomy, right? The tools for autonomy, for self-autonomy and self-efficacy, because that builds efficacy when you can be autonomous and you can have that practice.
Absolutely.
So I have two questions for you. One is, are you seeing any shifts and trends in accessibility? And the second part is, where do you see the future headed?
So I'll start with the first question, and it may be long-winded, so you might have to remind me of the second one. But so when I think about, I tell you what, I'll answer it two ways, right? One will be the kind of the changing landscape in the face of COVID, and also the changing landscape in terms of just natural progression, human evolution, right? So prior to COVID, our numbers rapidly increasing every year. And the way I think service increases have been observed and experienced here at the Goldman Center are twofold, right? So we're not only seeing more and more students coming to the Goldman Center for support, which to me means students are getting more and better support at earlier ages. There's less stigma associated with it. More students are comfortable advocating for their rights and getting the support they need early on. So some of that is just, it makes good sense, right? People are less resistant to ask for help, and they're able to do so in a confident way and know that they'll get the support that they need. I think that the other way that we've seen increases in terms of the complexity of those needs, right? So back when I started, we had about 500 students registered with our office back in 2009. And I would say the vast majority of those students had basic testing accommodations, extended time, maybe distraction reduced environment for testing. But now students are really dialed in, and they know what their learning styles are. They know what their learning deficiencies are. They a lot of times now you can ask a student, are you a visual or an auditory learner, and they know, and sometimes they come back to you with even more advanced knowledge, and they say, I'm more of a kinesthetic learner, right? More hands-on, which is really great because they're taking ownership of their learning style. But with that, and with advancements in assistive technology, and also with medical advancements that are allowing people that used to not be able to access education in a mainstream environment, now they're not only better supported in K through 12 arena, but they're pursuing their dreams and persisting and getting into college. And on that point, I'd just like to make sure I highlight, nothing has changed about those individuals. they were capable then, they're capable now. Society is improving, barriers are being reduced, advocacy is heightened. People are now demonstrating, recognizing that these wonderful students that used to not get these opportunities either due to severe physical or mobility impairments or due to not well known or not well understood neurodiverse diagnoses, they're thriving and they're outperforming many of their peers now. So I think that's a lot of what builds into our numbers and the volume and kind of the intensity of the work that we're seeing, right? There's a lot more that goes into considerations for supporting students than ever before. That is not Tulane specific, although I do feel like the nature of our general, kind of the dynamics of our general student population might contribute to some of that, to some of those numbers, but these are nationwide, probably even worldwide phenomenon that are impacting post-secondary learning experiences. I think when we think about how COVID and the transitions that we're all, working through at this time, the way that's impacted accessibility is kind of twofold, right? It's been really great in many ways. It's created lots of access in ways that we didn't used to have. It's also created some barriers for some people that maybe didn't ever have a prior need for assistance, right? And so I think some of the things that I'd highlight is, like, if you just think about it in a learning situation, a Zoom meeting, right? Attending a class via Zoom. Well, if I have to attend a class via Zoom, I'm automatically permitted to use my computer in that class, and that might be the most efficient way I take notes. And I realize this is 2020, but there are still professors that don't allow computers in the classroom. And I get it, right? They don't allow it because they find it distracting to themselves and to others. But they also can be wildly influential in terms of allowing a student to achieve their true abilities. So even the professors that we know that prohibit that accommodation in the classroom, I consider many of them allies to the office, right? Like, they're not bad people. There's nothing malicious. They're trying to improve the learning experience for all their students, which is a daunting task, right? I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. But we do need to be mindful that, like, everybody in the class learns differently. And, maybe you're projecting some of your own feelings about distractibility on others. And maybe we can let others speak for themselves in those regards, right? So there's very little that people do now with pen and paper. Almost everything is digital or online. And so I think being mindful of that is really helpful for people. I also think when you think about COVID, mask wearing and digital accessibility, like, it struggled, particularly for people with sensory impairments, right? Thinking about our students who are deaf, hard of hearing, communication is already extremely difficult for many of them. And there are a lot of students in our Tulane community that have some level of hearing loss that are not organically, connected to our office because they're really efficient lip readers. That kind of goes out the window, right? When you're using cloth face coverings. So even just being mindful of providing, clear masks, which we have for students and professors, is a really impactful way to help improve that dynamic. But, without going too far down that rabbit hole, COVID, I think the most important thing that it has done, when we were all thrust into this dynamic back in March, I think it highlighted for the university as a whole in ways that it never had before, why it's important to have things be accessible, right? And the real significant importance of digital accessibility, and so many things that the faculty and the wonderful folks over at NTC are doing simply by, I don't know if it's a mandate or a request, but I feel like it's largely being followed. Professors recording their lectures, right? Even if it's a synchronous course, but recording that lecture and letting the students, whether they're in class, online, to go back and look at that information again at a better time. Like, we're all human, right? Like, I signed up to do this webinar today with you guys a couple of weeks ago. I didn't know how I would be feeling today, right? Fortunately, I'm feeling good, but if I wasn't, I wouldn't have the benefit necessarily to just go back and do a redo, right? And so I think when students have added flexibility into the core constructs of their academic learning, they take ownership, they take responsibility, and probably most importantly, they get desired outcomes. They're able to perform in a way that's actually commensurate with their abilities. So I think that all those things are super important. We still have light years to go in terms of improving things, but we're headed in the right direction and things are really, really good. And I'm a silver linings kind of guy. And so throughout everything with COVID, I've been trying to really place extra emphasis on all the ways that we've actually had some accessibility improvements on campus. I want to make sure that I'm answering the specific question. So if you could tell me that second follow-up again, I'm happy to.
I think you kind of started answering it. I was asking about where do you see the future for this on college campuses or in higher ed?
Well, I can tell you it's a little bit harder, to put that vision into like how it's actually going to happen. I can tell you how I'd like it to happen.
Okay, we'll take that.
Yeah, well, I would say, and in order for this to actually materialize in a way that won't be eternally damning for me, I'd probably need to win the Powerball first. But my hope is to run myself out of a job, right? I don't want there to be a Goldman Center on Tulane's campus. I don't want there to be a disability services center on any campus. Or at least I don't want there to be a need for that, right? I want it to be a place where it's building community and where people want to go and they're like view it as a tutoring center or a counseling center, and people are using and accessing those resources to be proactive and to better themselves and to figure out how to overcome their challenges. But in terms of the community, like I want this campus to just be organically accessible. I don't want for a student to have to go out of their way and have to self-identify because they require a little bit more time to complete a test. No, I want professors to design tests that time isn't a factor, right? Like do better, create better assessments. There's lots of ways to do it. There's lots of ways to deliver instructional content that allows everybody access. And this isn't, I'm highlighting faculty right now, but it's not a blanket statement that we have lots of faculty who are already on board. It's also not just faculty, right? Faculty aren't making decisions about whether or not a building is accessible. When they're doing a renovation, they're not prioritizing what buildings are getting facelifts, what departments are being prioritized on campus in terms of the support that they need and the resource allocation. And I'm not just referring just to Goldman, I'm just speaking in general, right? Like there are lots of ways as a community we can improve to benefit all marginalized and underrepresented student populations, students with disabilities being one of them.
That's powerful. Yeah, I wish that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. Just if we all work together, accessibility benefits everyone. And so
yes,
creating an environment of access.
And I want to highlight, because I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't. And, Shawna was really transformative in kind of the way we changed our vision at Tulane, right? She came on board and really got us to start thinking about things outside of a medical model, which focuses more on fixing individuals and more on the social model of disability and what constructs are currently in place here at Tulane, within New Orleans, in Louisiana, in the country, in the world, that create unnecessary barriers for individuals, and what can we do to eliminate the barrier? So taking bad things away rather than adding things to support students, right? Like, take me out of it, right?
Yeah, we always talked about that. We said, let's put ourselves out of business. Let's just promote this model, help people see it. And one day maybe accommodations won't be necessary because the environment will be accessible for everyone.
Yeah, but you were absolutely the one that stirred up that Kool-Aid and got us all drinking it.
I'm not surprised.
I'll take the credit.
No surprise there.
Shawna, you know me, I give credit where it's due, and that firmly rests with you, even though you're no longer here in our center.
Well, thanks, Patrick.
Sure.
I still carry that torch,
We'll take her. We'll take her.
Thanks,
we'll keep her too.
I hope you will.
Thank you so much, Patrick. This was really quite an education.
Yeah. Is there anything else we haven't? I'm sorry, Jinaki, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to say that I hope that that our public actually feels like this is the education that I believe that it was. And so you came with a fount of knowledge, and it's also really a blessing that Shawna is on this too, so that she can also back you up on that education and help provide some of that education for us in And I'm glad you did talk about, like, you know, her legend, you know, in your office. So,
now we're getting hyperbolic.
I disagree.
I don't think so. That's
disagree.
pretty legendary to come in and transform, you know, a team in that way, to offer new ideas. That's what this is all about, really, is when we're talking about creating this village that you talk about. It really is about listening, because that one of the things that you could have not done was hear that and act on it, right? And so that's what we mean by team building. If someone brings something, you don't try to take up the space, but take it in and do something with it. And it seems like that was wildly transformative for your team. So
it absolutely was. And, you know, I would just share, like, when I think of, like, parting thoughts, so to speak, right? I think that, you know, mentioning again what Shawna mentioned, is that access helps everybody is really critical. The other thing that, just no matter how good or bad or indifferent your feelings are about the Goldman Center, we cannot do it alone. We cannot. It's not up to Carolyn Barber Pierre and Anna Abdullahat and the O to make sure that students of color are properly supported on this campus. It takes all of us. Not just students of color, all of our community members, yourself included, Jinaki. So the same holds true for us. It really does take a village. We're happy to take the lead on it, but we would love to build our army of allies, you know, even stronger than it already is, students, staff, faculty included. And really just thankful that you guys thought enough about the work that we do here to reach out and to highlight this in one of your webinars. And just really thankful for you both and all the important work you do to support our students.
thank you.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Look, before we wrap up, I do want to make sure we share the resources and the information. So let me just share my screen really quickly, just to get this info up there for our viewers. Just a reminder about the Counseling Center's new location on the Uptown campus. They have relocated to the Diebold Complex. And to make appointments at the Counseling Center, it's a really easy process. Call one number, 504-314-2277. Speak to one of those two lovely ladies, Charlesetta or Belinda, and they'll get you set up with a same-day consultation. So you will get to talk to a clinician that same day and via Zoom, so that we can be in this safe environment without masks, so we can all see each other's faces and really communicate well and make a plan. That first time appointment is really the opportunity for a clinician to hear what's going on and make a plan with you, and maybe even connect you with campus partners like the Goldman Center, if that seems like the right direction to go. Speaking of the Goldman Center, here's some information. If you're interested in talking with them, you can give them a call. You can look at the website. I noticed on your website, Patrick, you've got a FAQ page related to COVID questions. So I think that's really a powerful resource. You can email goldman@tulane.edu, and they are in the Science and Engineering Lab Complex building on the first floor. Don't forget to follow Campus Health on social media. On the Instagram, you can see these episodes in IGTV, or if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you can see every Wellbeing Wednesday episode. And as always, I try to finish us off with just a little bit of humor. It feels like it's kind of midterm season. The students I'm talking to are really feeling the pressure of getting halfway through the semester, or better than halfway. I think we're on the other side of the halfway mark. I know in the Goldman Center, you know, when it's exam season, it's a busy place. So I imagine you and your staff have been hopping. So we're really grateful that you took the time with us, Pat.
I'm extremely appreciative to have the opportunity. So thank you both so much. Wishing you both well.
Thank you. All right, we'll see y'all back here next Wednesday. In the meantime, please be well. Bye.
Bye.